White receptionist turned away a guest she thought didn't belong, not knowing that the girl she dismissed was Big Shaq's daughter, and the key to the hotel wasn't in her hand, it was in her bloodline. Now the truth is, walking back through those doors, and this time it owns the building. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was the kind of place that made silence feel rich. White stone floors glistened beneath crystal lighting. Ocean air slipped through the revolving doors and mixed with sandalwood and citrus diffusers. The Palm Reverie Hotel, nestled on a stretch of the California coast, had always been a retreat for the powerful, the kind of guests whose names never needed to be spoken aloud. But lately, a quiet change had passed through the corridors. Ownership had shifted hands, new blood, but no one knew whose. The whispers hadn't made it to the front desk yet. The concierge staff, polished and distant, moved with precision. Among them, Jolene Carver held her post like a gatekeeper more than a greeter, watching every guest with the sharp eyes of someone who thought she could predict people. Her smile, when it came, was tight and practiced. When it didn't come, it left a sting. That Saturday morning, around 10:34 a.m., a young black woman stepped through the revolving door. She wore high-waisted jeans, a tucked-in cotton tee, and a soft navy duffel over one shoulder. Her name was Mamura O'Neill, and her father had booked her stay without saying a word about it. She was just told to pack light, bring her journal, and take a break before orientation week at Duke. The reservation was under M. O'Neill, nothing more. Mamura approached the front desk with a kind of quiet confidence that comes from being raised by someone who taught her never to apologize for existing in nice places. Still, she cleared her throat before speaking. "Hi. I think I have a reservation for the weekend under O'Neill." Jolene didn't look up at first. She typed slowly, eyes narrowed at the screen. Her mouth moved, counting letters, before she lifted her gaze. It landed on Maura's brown skin, her natural hair in a loose bun, her sneakers slightly scuffed. Then Jolene smiled, but not the kind of smile that meant welcome, more like amusement laced with dismissal. "O'Neill, you said?" Jolene's voice didn't rise like a question. It flattened. "Yes." Mira kept her voice steady. Jolene clicked again. Her fingers moved faster than before, but her eyes never softened. "I don't see anything here for you. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Miara opened her phone. "I have the confirmation email." "That's okay," Jolene interrupted, holding up a hand like a stop sign. "This hotel is a private luxury property. We don't accept walk-ins or guests without verified profiles." Her glance down Mara's outfit wasn't subtle. Mara felt the heat rise behind her collar. "I didn't walk in. My father booked." "Of course," Jolene cut in again, more firmly this time. "I'm sorry, miss, but we don't have anything under that name. And I need to ask you to step aside for paying guests." A couple in linen and pearls appeared behind her in line. Jolene's eyes flicked past Mamira and landed on them, instantly brightening. "I'll be right with you." Mamira stood for a second longer, heart pounding. She wasn't used to this kind of dismissal, not because it never happened, but because she'd spent years learning how to avoid triggering it. Dress right, speak right, stay calm. Still, here it was, raw and She looked down at the counter, then back up at Jolene. Jolene didn't flinch. Her smile hardened like cement. Mara stepped back. She could feel the eyes behind her, not cruel, just curious. That was worse. She adjusted her duffel, nodded silently, and turned toward the exit. The sun outside was blinding. It hit the marble walkway and bounced into her eyes like judgment. She squinted, walked down 3 steps, and sat on a stone bench just beyond the awning. Her fingers clenched the phone still open to her dad's text. "Enjoy the weekend, baby girl. You deserve it." She didn't want to call him. Not yet. Something in her told her to wait. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fact that the tears stinging her eyes weren't from the sun. Back inside, the front desk resumed its rhythm. Jolene smiled brightly at the couple, checked them in, called bell service. The air conditioning hummed. Everything moved on. Except it hadn't. Upstairs, past 3 security doors and a biometric scanner, a man watched the scene from a dark office trimmed in walnut and leather. The screen in front of him had no sound, just footage. 5 camera angles, each capturing what had just taken place at the front desk. He leaned forward, resting thick forearms on the desk. His expression didn't twist or rage. It settled into something heavier, disappointment. Shaquille O'Neal, majority stakeholder in Reverie Holdings Group, watched his daughter be turned away from the hotel he now owned. He didn't call for security. He didn't call for HR. He just sat there for a minute longer. Watch. The screen froze on Jolene's face, mid-sentence. Then with a flick, Shaq clicked the feed off. The room fell quiet. The phone on his desk buzzed once. A call from his personal assistant. Shaq answered. Voice low. She just got here, he said. Pause. No, don't say anything yet. He stood slowly, walked over to the window, and looked down at the beach. A little girl ran through the tide, laughing. A boy chased her, stumbling in the sand. Shaq's voice grew quiet. Just watch who watches. And he hung up. The door to the surveillance suite was marked Maintenance Control, an innocuous label designed to keep curiosity out. Behind it, the room thrummed softly with the low hum of servers and monitors. The temperature was kept low to protect the machines, but it also gave the place a cold, clinical feeling. 12 screens mounted on the wall displayed rotating camera angles, lobby, hallways, restaurant terrace, elevator landing. But one screen remained fixed, frozen on a moment from 20 minutes earlier. There was Mira O'Neill, paused mid-step outside the glass doors, her face drawn tight, her back upright but fragile. The lobby behind her glittered with light, polished marble, and false smiles. Inside, people went on checking in, ordering drinks, slipping into vacation. Outside, a daughter sat alone on a sunlit bench, unaware of what her father had already seen. In a sleek corner office 5 floors above the lobby, Shaquille O'Neal stood at the window, hands in his pockets, phone screen black on his desk behind him. He hadn't moved since ending the last call. The ocean was out there, soft waves, bright horizon, everything the brochure promised. But right now it felt like the backdrop to a bitter echo. Shaq turned back toward the monitors set into the wall opposite his desk. They were silent, but they didn't need audio. He'd read every expression on Jolene Carver's face, the thin-lipped dismissiveness, the calculated superiority, the kind of fake patience that had always been worse than outright hostility. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't used any slur, and yet what she had done echoed louder than words. He didn't slam a fist. He didn't shout orders. He sat in his chair, the one built to support a man of his size and weight, customized but never flashy. His fingers tapped lightly against the wood. The irony hadn't escaped him. For years, people said his money made him untouchable, that racism wouldn't find his kids because they carried his name. And here it was, not even cloaked, just casual, everyday exclusion, dressed in linen and politeness. His daughter had been turned away from her own room because someone didn't see her as belonging. He opened the drawer beside him and pulled out an old laminated press badge. It was cracked at the corners. ESPN coverage. 203. A different era. Back then, cameras followed him. Now, he used them. Shaq had bought Palm Reverie for more than investment. After his mother Lucille told him about a hotel in Mississippi that refused her a room during a road trip in the late 70s. He'd carried that story with him. That image, Lucille sitting in a hot car while her kids tried not to ask questions, had shaped him. It was the first time he understood what powerlessness looked like in a place of wealth. And now that he had power, he didn't want to wield it with fire. He wanted to use it with vision. He picked up the landline, pressed a single number, and waited. The voice that answered was brisk, formal. "I want the general manager in my office." "Now," Shaq said. Then he hung up. No explanation. No elaboration. Exactly 4 minutes later, the knock came. Bryce Whitmore stepped into the room, crisp in a slate blue suit, the kind that matched the branding of Palm Reverie. He was tall, with silver at his temples, and a practiced calm that made him good at smoothing over issues before they became PR crises. He walked in with a polite smile that began to falter the moment he saw what was on the main screen. Bryce looked at the image of Moira, frozen in the sun. His eyes flicked once to Shaq, then back to the screen. "I assume you've seen the lobby footage?" Shaq asked, voice low but cutting through the air like weight. "I have now," Bryce said cautiously. "I wasn't alerted to any incident." "You were never meant to be alerted," Shaq interrupted, "because this wasn't loud enough to be labeled, but it was loud enough for her." Bryce straightened. "I'll speak to the front desk staff immediately." If this was a case of discrimination, it was discrimination, Shaq said, this time looking directly at him. "Let's not tiptoe around it. Jolene didn't check the system. She didn't verify. She profiled. You know it. I know it. And now security knows it. Bryce nodded, the weight of realization finally settling in. Would you like her terminated? Shaq paused. That was the easy solution. Cut off the symptom and move on. But he wasn't interested in easy. No, he said. We don't bury this. We teach from it. Bryce blinked. You want to… What, make an example? Shaq stood and walked slowly to the window. His voice came softer now, reflective. When my mother was turned away, no one apologized. They didn't lose their jobs. They just forgot she was ever there. But she never forgot. And I won't let my daughter carry that same silence. He turned back to Bryce. I want the staff here to understand exactly what happened. Not from HR slides or generic training videos. From us. From her. From Lucille. Bryce raised a brow. Surprised. Lucille? She's flying in tonight. Shaq said. We'll host a closed-door forum tomorrow morning. I want every department head present. No press, no fanfare. Just the truth. And Jolene? She attends. She listens. If she walks out unchanged, that's on her. But she hears us. Bryce nodded slowly. Understood. I'll coordinate logistics. As he turned to leave, Shaq stopped him with a final question. What would you have done if that was your daughter? Bryce paused at the doorway, the words catching in his throat. He didn't answer. He just nodded once more and left. Shaq returned to his seat, the light shifting behind him. The Pacific shimmered like a canvas, endless and indifferent. Below, guests dipped in the pool, laughed over brunch, ordered cocktails with names they'd forget by evening. And outside the entrance, Mira still sat on the bench, phone resting on her lap. She hadn't texted yet. She was waiting, perhaps sensing something bigger was shifting beneath her feet. The hotel hadn't noticed her. But now it would. The hotel's morning breeze carried with it the faint scent of sea salt, lavender, and entitlement. In the break room behind the concierge desk, the walls were thin enough that the lobby's soft piano music could still be heard, like the place wanted even its employees to believe they lived inside a dream. Jolene Carver sipped her coffee and leaned back in the faux leather swivel chair, legs crossed confidently, as she recounted her version of the morning's events to a coworker who only half listened between bites of a protein bar. She came in like she owned the place, Jolene said with a short laugh, curling her lip as if the memory was somehow both amusing and irritating. Didn't even say her name right at first. Just walked up with that attitude. The coworker, a younger man named Ellis with a smooth fade and a nervous habit of checking his watch, shifted slightly. He'd caught a glimpse of the girl earlier. She didn't seem disrespectful. Just young, maybe shy. But he didn't say that. Jolene was known for being firm, and Ellis had only been on payroll for 3 weeks. Jolene continued. I handled it. Told her we don't allow drop-ins or unverified guests. She didn't even look like she belonged here anyway. Jeans and a gym bag? Seriously? Ellis cleared his throat. You sure she didn't have a reservation? Jolene's eyes narrowed. I checked. She gave a name. Didn't match anything. Probably fishing for a free night. I've seen that trick before. Trying to use a famous last name and see if someone gives in. You can't be soft in this job. There was pride in her tone. The same kind of pride that grows in people when they think they've outsmarted a problem, even if that problem was never real. But across the building, in a suite with a view too vast to contain petty lies, Shaq sat quietly on the edge of a couch. His elbows rested on his knees, and his eyes were fixed on the muted television, not watching the screen, but staring through it. In his mind, the images that played were older, grainier, and far more personal. He was 7 years old, barefoot in the back seat of a station wagon, his legs sticking to the vinyl. Lucille sat in the front passenger seat, her sunglasses low on her nose, her hands clenched tight in her lap. The gas station attendant had told them there were no public restrooms, but Shaq had seen a woman use it, moments before. Lucille didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply turned back to the car, lifted her chin, and waited for her husband to return with the change. Later, when they pulled off on a dirt road, so Lucille could relieve herself behind a row of trees, Shaq had pretended to sleep, but he was awake. He saw the way her shoulders shook. He saw her wipe her face quickly before getting back in the car, and he never forgot it. Years later, Lucille told him she hadn't cried out of shame. She cried because she didn't want to hate. I didn't want the world to harden me, she had said, but it tried. Now here it was again, dressed in heels and a name tag, still trying. Shaq rose from the couch and moved toward the window. Mamera was gone from the bench now. He figured she went walking, or maybe found a cafe nearby. She'd left without calling. Maybe because she didn't want to ruin the gift her father had planned, or maybe because she already knew what he was going to say. That he was sorry. That the world hadn't changed enough. That he still hadn't fixed it. But change didn't come in apologies. It came in exposure. Back in the break room, Jolene checked her lipstick in a compact mirror. Girl was probably bluffing anyway, she said. And let's be honest, if she had money she wouldn't look like that. We know how they do. Ellis tensed slightly. Who's they? Jolene blinked, caught off guard. You know what I mean. But Ellis didn't answer. He wasn't sure if silence made him complicit, or if speaking up would put his job in jeopardy. The unspoken rules of surviving in service work were as old as the industry. Blend in, stay in line, and never challenge a senior staffer on race. What Jolene didn't know, what she hadn't even bothered to consider, was that the new ownership had eyes everywhere. Not just cameras, but people. Quiet staff members placed intentionally, training assistants from the O'Neill Foundation posing as interns, real guests with real stories, asked discreetly to report what they saw and heard. The goal wasn't to catch people, it was to catch patterns. And Jolene's pattern was already visible. 2 weeks ago, she had mistaken an elderly black couple for staff during a conference. Last month, she'd told a Latina woman that her credit card looked suspicious before checking it twice. These incidents had been minor, forgettable, written off as customer misunderstandings, but now, the dots connected. Not because someone finally reported her, but because the person she dismissed today wasn't just anyone. Mamara had told no one what happened. Not yet, but the footage told the story better than words could. In Shaq's office, his assistant stepped in and handed him a file. Inside were 3 printed transcripts, incident summaries compiled from staff logs and guest feedback surveys. At the bottom of each one, Jolene's name was listed. Small actions, small moments, but they built something undeniable. Shaq looked up. Is she still on shift? Until 5, the assistant replied. He nodded slowly. Good. Let her finish the day. The assistant hesitated. Sir, should I notify legal? Prep PR? No, Shaq said. This ain't about headlines. He paused before adding. We're not canceling her. We're showing her what she missed. The assistant left, and the room fell silent again. Shaq returned to his desk and pulled out his notebook. In big block handwriting, he scribbled 5 words. How they see us changes. Then he underlined it twice. The afternoon sun poured over the coastal ridgeline, casting long golden angles against the facade of Palm Reverie. The wind had calmed since morning, but there was still a restless energy in the air, like something was shifting beneath the surface. The glass doors of the main entrance parted with a gentle hush, and Lucille O'Neill stepped through them, dressed in soft cream slacks, a pressed blouse, and shoes that didn't scream for attention but whispered elegance. Her pace was measured, her posture erect, her presence undeniable, even if no one recognized her name on sight. The lobby was busy with weekend check-ins, but she moved unnoticed. That suited her. She didn't need stares or applause. She had long ago learned that the quietest women often carried the most weight. Her eyes scanned the chandeliers, the front desk, the floor beneath her, remembering a time when such lobbies were off-limits, when her smile had to be folded away to avoid suspicion, when travel meant preparing for rejection. She passed the reception desk just as Jolene Carver was finishing an exchange with a guest. Jolene didn't look up. To her, Lucille was just another woman in expensive flats. Another older guest who'd likely ask about spa times or shuttle schedules. She nodded briefly, forced and polite, then turned away without thought. Lucille kept walking. It wasn't the first time she'd been invisible to someone who believed themselves important. She followed the hallway past the concierge station, down toward the east wing. There, a collection of portraits hung in deliberate rows. Founders, investors, celebrated guests. Once, years ago, one of those photographs had been the face of a man who denied Lucille and her children a room during a southern road trip. He hadn't shouted, he'd simply smiled, apologized for being overbooked, and closed the reservation book. The parking lot was empty behind him. Now that photo was gone. Lucille stood in front of the new arrangement. The man's absence was a quiet, powerful erasure. In his place, a modern abstract painting had been installed, an explosion of layered color, full of motion and story. She knew who chose it. She smiled faintly, then turned and headed outside. The garden sat behind the hotel, half wrapped in vines and pale stone. Benches circled a wide fountain, where water spilled in rhythmic arcs. Guests strolled lazily, some with drinks, some with phones, and a few simply soaking in the calm. But on the far bench beneath the old olive tree, Mara O'Neill sat alone, her posture drawn in, shoulders slightly hunched like someone protecting her own spirit from the wind. Lucille walked toward her granddaughter without rushing. She didn't announce herself, didn't call out. She simply sat beside her. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Mara finally looked over, surprised, and her face softened the moment she saw her grandmother. "Grandma? I'm here, baby," Lucille said, her voice rich and low, like someone who'd never lost the rhythm of gospel even after years of silence. Mara blinked back something that hovered just beneath her lashes. "I didn't call anyone. I just didn't want Dad to feel like the gift was ruined." "It isn't ruined," Lucille said. "It just hasn't unfolded yet." Mara looked back toward the hotel. The woman at the desk, she didn't even listen. Didn't check anything. Just saw me and assumed I didn't belong. Lucille nodded slowly. "I know the feeling." Mara turned to her again. "Did this ever happen to you?" Lucille's pause held decades. "Once," she said. "When your father was little, we stopped at a hotel in Alabama. The sign said vacancy. The parking lot was empty. I walked in with his hand in mine, just needing to rest for the night. The man behind the counter didn't yell, didn't cut. He just told me there were no rooms available, and smiled like he was doing me a favor by being polite about it. What did you do?" "I walked back to the car. I didn't cry in front of your father, but later when I thought he was asleep, I did." Mira's eyes shone. "He remembers." Lucille smiled. "Of course he does. That's why he bought this place. Not for profit, for people like you, like me, who should never again be made to feel small, under chandeliers." They sat in silence as a breeze pushed through the branches above them. The olive tree rattled softly, like applause from a hidden crowd. Mimara exhaled slowly. I wanted to scream at her. I really did. But something held me back. "That something is your bloodline," Lucille said. "We don't shout to be heard. We move so the world has no choice but to see us." "But what if they never do?" Mira asked. Lucille turned toward her. "Then we keep moving anyway." Behind them, the hotel buzzed with normalcy. Guests ordered cocktails. Bells chimed at the elevator. A child laughed down the hallway. But inside that calm, something quiet and seismic was beginning to shift. Lucille looked over at her granddaughter with pride that needed no words. "You stayed graceful. That's power." Mira leaned into her side just slightly. "It didn't feel powerful." "Most storms don't while they're forming," Lucille replied. The sun began to lower itself across the garden, casting long streaks of gold across the lawn, and turning the fountain water into amber. Somewhere inside the hotel, someone finally checked the reservation and realized who Mira was. But it was already too late for apologies. In the stillness of the garden, 2 generations sat under a tree, older than the hotel itself, rooted in the same soil that once tried to reject them. Now they claimed it, not with rage, not with noise, but with the quiet presence of people who'd earned the right to sit anywhere. By late afternoon, the sky over Palm Reverie had begun to shift into softer blues. The sun, once harsh and declarative, now dipped lower, casting long shadows through the hotel's massive glass facade. Inside Shaquille O'Neal's office, the mood was heavier than the breeze outside. The room was quiet, but movement had begun, deliberate, quiet, unstoppable. Shaq stood in front of the window, phone in hand, staring at the sea as his thumb hovered over the contacts list. He wasn't angry in the way people expected him to be. No yelling, no storming through hallways. His power didn't live in volume. It lived in precision. He scrolled past agents, PR reps, media execs, until he landed on the name he needed. The first call went to Trina McCall, his legal counsel. She picked up on the second ring, sharp as ever. "What happened?" she asked. Her voice was clipped, ready for fire. "We have a case," Shaq said calmly. "But I don't want to file one. I want to fix one." Trina paused. "Talk to me." He walked her through what happened, the footage, the tone, the dismissive glances, the pattern. Trina didn't interrupt. When he finished, she simply said, "We can build a policy framework around this. Bias audits, response strategy, oversight." "Good," he replied. "I want policy. I want accountability." But first, I want her to see the receptionist. No, he said, turning from the window. All of them. He hung up, one call down. The second was to Michael Barnes, head of media relations for the O'Neill Foundation. A strategist by design, Barnes had a knack for turning silence into signal. Mike, how quickly can you spin a live media moment without blowing it into a scandal? Give me the hook. Mike answered. Alert. We had a moment here. A small one. But it carries history. I want to show it. Not to expose anyone, but to educate. A public address? Internal. Live streamed. Controlled. No press conference. No incident headline. Just truth. Mike's voice sharpened with interest. I can bring in production quietly. Cameras on standby in under 24 hours. Do it, Shaq said. And make sure there's no press leak. I don't want this to feel like punishment. I want it to feel like revelation. As he ended the second call, the third buzzed in on its own. Bryce Whitmore, regional manager of the property. The man sounded breathless even before he spoke. Mr. O'Neill, I just saw the updated report and the surveillance timestamp. Why didn't I? You're seeing it now, Shaq cut in. That's what matters. I didn't know who she was. The front desk. They didn't flag anything. I want to assure you this doesn't reflect. Shaq lowered his tone, his voice calm but absolute. Bryce, this isn't about who she is. It's about who they thought she wasn't. There was a beat of silence on the other end. You've watched the footage? Shaq asked. Yes, Bryce said. His voice was quieter now. I have.
And?
I didn't realize how quickly it happened. How easily. She didn't even get a second sentence out. That's the point, Shaq said. You don't need slurs to exclude someone. You just need indifference. Bryce exhaled, rattled. What do you want me to do? I want every department lead in the ballroom at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Staff, management, security, even janitorial. I want the doors closed, cameras on. We're going to speak. A training? Shaq's pause stretched. No, a reckoning. Before Bryce could respond, Shaq added, make sure Jolene's there. No one's to be informed about what this is. They'll find out when they sit down. He ended the call. 3 calls. 3 sparks. Shaq turned and looked at the floor plan of the hotel pinned beside his desk. The ballroom sat at the center, just beneath the second-level garden terrace, a place usually reserved for weddings and exclusive investor events. Tomorrow, it would serve a different purpose, not celebration, not accusation, but transformation. He walked to the dry erase board on the far wall and scrawled a phrase he hadn't spoken aloud since childhood. Dignity doesn't whisper. It walks in. As he stepped back from the board, his assistant appeared in the doorway with a hesitant smile. Miara's been found. She's at the local bookstore on Huntington. Didn't check her messages. Shaq nodded. Good. Send a car. Quietly. No pressure. The assistant tilted her head. Does she know what's happening? No, he said. And I don't want her to, not yet. I just want her to come back tomorrow morning. Tell her breakfast is on me. She smiled. Of course. Anything else? One more thing, he said. Pull Jolene's employment history. I want to know how long she's been working like no one's watching. The assistant vanished down the hall, and Shaq leaned against the edge of the desk. There was no sense of triumph in his chest, no thrill of revenge. He wasn't interested in watching someone burn. He wanted to watch someone. Outside, the sun began its descent into orange. The Pacific stretched out like melted gold. On the veranda, guests sipped wine, their laughter faint through the breeze. They had no idea that under the surface of this luxury retreat, something real was being built. Not a scandal, not a spectacle, a blueprint for visibility. Shaq turned off the lights in the office and stepped out, the weight of history quiet in his footsteps. Tomorrow the hotel would host more than guests. It would host a mirror. The morning sun shimmered on the marble floor of the Palm Reverie, like someone had polished it with purpose. The lobby had a manufactured calm classical piano, through discreet ceiling speakers, the scent of bergamot candles flickering behind the front desk, polished shoes of concierge staff moving in rhythm. But beneath that calm something was different today. The staff felt it without knowing why. The air carried tension, like static before a storm, subtle but undeniable. Jolene Carver adjusted the collar of her navy blazer, lips glossed, hair tighter than usual. She had spent an extra 10 minutes on her appearance. No one had told her anything outright, but there were whispers, something about a special address, higher-ups in the building, and awareness protocols being reviewed. Her instinct had kicked in the moment the front desk chat thread buzzed with the phrase, internal visibility. That was code for someone important watching. So when the glass doors opened around 9:45 a.m., and a tall, athletic black girl stepped into the lobby in black sneakers, retro sunglasses, and a hoodless gray crewneck, Jolene's smile activated on command. "Welcome to Palm Reverie," she chirped. "Posture straight. Are you checking in?" Mimara O'Neill removed her sunglasses slowly, her expression unreadable. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the lobby. Not lost, not overwhelmed, just taking inventory of the space that had refused her 24 hours ago. Her gaze skimmed the same marble desk, the velvet rope queue, the spot where she'd stood yesterday. Jolene's smile began to falter, not because she recognized Miura, but because she couldn't read her. "I believe your name's already in the system," Miura said finally, voice smooth, not loud but with that same unsettling calm Lucille carried in her eyes. Jolene blinked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Of course. Let me just, what's the name again?" Before Miura could answer, a small group of hotel employees appeared from the side corridor, whispering, adjusting their uniforms, clearing their throats, heads turned toward the main entrance, and then the lobby changed. Shaquille O'Neal stepped through the doors. Not the hidden observer in a corner office. Not the CEO behind a tinted window. This time, he was public, present, and towering. In every sense of the word. His suit was dark, simple, unbranded. No flash, just weight. Every guest in the lobby who'd once whispered, "I think that's Shaq," now stood still as the truth landed. Phones were drawn, eyebrows raised. Conversations paused. Jolene froze. Her eyes darted from Shaq to Miara, and back again, and then it hit her. The girl from yesterday. The girl she dismissed. The girl she asked to step aside. Oni. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Shaq didn't even look at her. Instead, he turned toward the assembled lobby, where the employees and a few intrigued guests were now gathering in a loose half-circle. The subtle hum of cameras being set up in the background gave the moment a shape. Miura stepped to the side, arms crossed, expression still calm. Shaq took one step forward and addressed the room. "I grew up in a world where sometimes you had to knock to be let in," he said. "And sometimes no matter how long you knocked, no one answered." The lobby fell into silence. Even the piano music had stopped, muted remotely by a technician who understood the gravity of live moments. Shaq scanned the faces in front of him. Young bellhops, veteran housekeepers, concierge staff. Jolene stood stiffly at the edge of the desk, trying to shrink into the background while pretending not to. But the problem wasn't the door, Shaq continued. It was the people guarding it. And more often than not, they didn't even know they were guarding anything. They thought they were protecting the space, when really, they were keeping people out. He gestured gently, not with aggression but with emphasis. "This hotel stands on the coast, open to the world. That's what it claims. But yesterday, someone stood in this very lobby and was made to feel small, less, because of a snap judgment." There was a shift in the room, not gasps, but breath held, awareness. Some staff glanced at Jolene. She pretended not to notice. "This isn't about embarrassment," Shaq said. "It's not about pointing fingers or getting viral. I didn't call a press conference. I'm not here for noise. I'm here for clarity." He looked toward Mira for the first time. Their eyes met, a silent exchange of trust and quiet strength. Then he turned back to the staff. "We don't fire people to solve problems. We face them. We grow. So today there's no blame meeting. There's a gathering. In that ballroom, behind those double doors, we're going to talk about what hospitality really means. Not in theory, in truth." A murmur spread. Guests looked at one another. Employees shifted uneasily. Shaq raised a hand. "You don't have to say anything. You just have to listen. But know this. If you work here, you represent more than linen napkins and reservation systems. You represent whether this place actually means what it claims to be." Then, as if on cue, the assistant manager opened the ballroom doors at the far end of the lobby. Chairs were arranged. Cameras were set to private stream. Water bottles lined a table, untouched. Shaq nodded once and began walking. Miara followed behind him, steady, without flinching. Jolene remained frozen. As Shaq passed the front desk, he paused, not to look at her, not to address her, but to make a statement that would land like thunder without a raised voice. Let's talk about what hospitality should mean, he said to the lobby. And then he walked away. Jolene exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned them to the keyboard. She couldn't look up. Not because of shame. Not yet. Shame required understanding. What she felt now was fear, the creeping realization that power had been in the room the entire time, and she had looked it dead in the eye and dismissed it. The grand ballroom of Palm Reverie had been transformed overnight. Not with florals or chandeliers. Those were already there, but with something less ornamental, more human. The usual arrangement of crisp linen and buffet tables had been stripped away, replaced with rows of simple white chairs and a single podium placed off-center, more intimate than official. No banners, no corporate backdrops, just truth waiting to be spoken. As the doors opened, a quiet crowd began to assemble, not the usual curated guest list for charity galas or wine-tasting luncheons. This audience was a mix: hotel staff from every department, long-term guests who'd been gently invited to observe, a few local media outlets whose presence had been strictly instructed to listen, not spin. Everyone entered with a low buzz of confusion, some murmuring about why they'd been summoned, others holding clipboards and coffees, pretending not to be uneasy. The room quieted when Shaquille O'Neal stepped forward, not with flash or performance, but with the weight of someone who didn't need applause to be heard. He stood without paper, without screen, just the kind of presence that silences even skeptical rooms. I never wanted to own a hotel, he said, voice calm and steady. But I wanted to own the spaces that used to shut people like me out. A few heads tilted, murmurs quieted further. When I was a kid, my mama and I used to take road trips across the South, he continued. There were places we couldn't stop, signs that didn't say anything, but said everything. Places where the front desk suddenly had no rooms, even when the parking lot was empty. He paused, letting the words sink in like weight on the chest. I bought Palm Reverie because I wanted my daughter to grow up in a world that felt different, that looked at her and saw more than what they expected. The room was still. Then, from the second row, Lucille O'Neal stood, elegant as ever, her voice soft, almost grandmotherly, but lined with steel. When I was denied a room back then, she said, it wasn't the insult that hurt the most. It was the silence after. Nobody apologized. Nobody even noticed. She looked around the room. But my son did. He remembered. She nodded toward Shaq, who took his seat beside her. Then, without cue or announcement, Mamera stepped forward. She didn't touch the mic. She didn't need amplification. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Yesterday, she began. I was told I didn't belong here. Not with words, but with looks. With being ignored. With someone deciding that what they saw was enough to make me invisible. Eyes drifted toward Jolene, seated halfway back, stiff and pale. She tried not to flinch. Miara went on, steady. I'm the daughter of the man who owns this building. I'm the granddaughter of a woman who's been told no more times than most of you could count. And still I was made to feel like I was trespassing in a place built to be welcoming. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was introspective. People looked inward, not just toward her. The air carried the kind of tension that doesn't ask for reaction, only recognition. I'm not angry, Mira said. I'm exhausted, because it's not about being famous or rich or connected. It's about being seen, really seen. The room didn't clap, not because they didn't want to, but because clapping would have broken something sacred. Instead, she walked back to her seat, her presence larger than applause. Shaq stood once more. His voice was softer now. This isn't a press stunt. It's not a campaign. It's a mirror. He gestured gently to the center aisle. Some of us have been reflected in this mirror for decades. Others just now caught their own eyes in it. A hush fell as heads turned toward Jolene, seated alone, her hands clenched on her lap. Her eyes flicked toward the cameras, toward the staff, toward the girl she had dismissed like background noise. Shaq didn't call her out by name. He didn't have to. He simply asked, would anyone like to say anything? All eyes moved to Jolene, her breath caught. She didn't rise right away, didn't storm out either. Instead, she slowly stood, her legs stiff, her gaze darting like someone waking up in a dream they didn't know was theirs. She walked forward 3 steps, then stopped. I didn't know who she was, Jolene said. Her voice cracked, uncertain. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to. She stopped again. The words didn't form. And this time she didn't force them. Jolene looked at Miura. Their eyes met for 1 second. Not forgiveness. Not even understanding. Just acknowledgement. Then Jolene turned and walked out. Not in anger, not in disgrace, but in silence. She left without fanfare, and no one followed. No one stopped her. No one clapped. Because this wasn't about a takedown. It was about a turning point. Lucille leaned in toward Shaq. She'll remember this longer than if you'd fired her. I hope so, he replied. A hotel bell chimed faintly in the background. Staff began to rise. Some were still quiet. Others nodded to one another, unsure of what to say but knowing something inside them had shifted. And outside, just past the glass walls, the ocean stretched forward like it always had. But today, for the first time in years, it felt like the lobby inside was ready to match its openness. By noon the next day, the story had left the walls of Palm Reverie and was sprinting across timelines, hashtags and breakfast television segments. But it didn't explode the way scandal usually did. It didn't trend because of outrage. It climbed because of something rare: sincerity. Clips from the internal address had been selectively released by the O'Neill Foundation's media team. Not the footage of Jolene or her stammered exit, but the moments that mattered. Shaq speaking about ownership and dignity. Lucille recounting her road trip rejections with grace. Mira's poised declaration. It's about being seen. The video was titled Voices in the Lobby. It clocked just under 6 minutes and hit 1 million views in its first 4 hours. The press coverage came, as expected, but the tone was different. Headlines weren't salacious. They were measured. Shaq turns discrimination into dialogue. When leadership looks like listening. A hotel, a daughter, and a lesson in real hospitality. Even talk shows picked it up. Not with panel arguments or culture war jargon, but thoughtful discussions about visibility, modern racism, and how legacy families handle harm. There were no villains propped up for public dragging. There was no viral clip of someone melting down at a front desk. Instead, what emerged was a model. Not perfect, but human. Inside the hotel, things were quieter. The front desk was being rotated with temp staff while internal audits continued. Guests came and went. Mira had checked out without fuss that morning, returning to her normal world of academic prep. Quietly proud, slightly shaken, but deeply intact. But there was one decision still looming: what to do with Jolene Carver. Shaq could have let the public pressure make it easy. No one would have faulted him for firing her outright. In fact, some expected it. She should be made an example. One post read, "This is what accountability looks like." Another commented beneath a news article. But Shaq didn't budge. That wasn't the lesson he wanted this moment to become. He called his legal team, his HR liaison, and then Lucille. "I'm thinking about keeping her on," he said, voice low. Lucille, who was ironing a white linen shirt when the call came, didn't sound surprised. "I thought you might. But not just keeping her," he continued. "I want her to do the work. Deep work. Not HR videos. Real, uncomfortable, hands-on work." Lucille's voice was steady. "You want her to see what it's like on the other side of that desk." "Exactly," Shaq said. The next morning, Jolene was summoned to the office. Her posture was tense, her face drawn but not defiant. She'd seen the footage. She'd seen the response. But most of all, she'd seen herself, for the first time in a way that was undeniable. She hadn't slept well, guilt mixed with confusion in her chest like acid and water. Shaq didn't raise his voice. "I'm not letting you go," he began. "Because firing you lets you off too easy. You don't get to walk away from this and just pretend it didn't happen." Jolene opened her mouth to speak, but Shaq held up a hand. "You're going to participate in our foundation's community immersion program. 2 days a week. No skipping. No excuses. You'll work in shelters, with outreach teams, sit in on restorative justice circles, and Lucille, my mother, she's going to oversee your journey." Jolene blinked. "Your mother?" "Yes. The same woman who was once denied a room in a hotel just like this," Shaq said, locking eyes with her. "The same woman you walked past yesterday without seeing." Jolene looked down. "I don't want your tears," he added, voice firm but not cruel. "I want your transformation." She nodded once. Not as submission, but understanding. Quiet understanding. A week later, Jolene began her first session under Lucille's watch. It wasn't in a hotel conference room. It was at a small community center, 20 minutes inland, where families who'd been displaced from housing gathered for meals and resources. Jolene didn't wear a blazer. She wore jeans and a foundation polo, and had been told to sit, not speak for the first hour. Lucille led the circle. They talked about times they were unseen, ignored, wrongly labeled. One woman described being mistaken for a cleaner in the very hotel she'd saved 6 months to stay at. Another described a TSA agent who pulled her aside every time she flew. Jolene listened. Her throat tightened. These weren't stories framed for headlines. These were the little daily humiliations, stacked and silent. Lucille didn't call Jolene out. She didn't need to. She spoke about her past only when asked, describing pain without bitterness, exclusion without vengeance. Her power came in her composure, and Jolene was beginning to see that power didn't always shout. Back at Palm Reverie, employees were undergoing new layers of training, not check-the-box compliance modules, but in-person workshops, immersive storytelling simulations, and live discussions facilitated by local activists and educators. Shaq showed up to the first one unannounced. He didn't speak. He sat in the back row and took notes. When asked why he hadn't simply fired Jolene and moved on, he responded, "Firing her changes nothing, but maybe showing her how to see changes everything." The press followed up with another headline, "When grace is the harder option." Meanwhile, the video of Mira continued to circulate in educational forums, racial bias training sessions, and community colleges. Her words had landed with thousands of young black women who shared the same feeling, being powerful on paper, yet invisible in practice. One comment under the video read, "I didn't know how to name it, but this is exactly what it feels like." By the end of the month, Palm Reverie had become something it had never intended to be. Not just a resort, but a model. Quietly studied, softly praised, and genuinely changed. And Lucille? She returned to the community center each week, even after Jolene's rotation ended. Because real reform didn't end with apology. It began with who stayed to keep the door open. It was the kind of morning that started soft. The clouds were brushed thin, and light across the sky like silk, and the breeze that passed over the Palm Reverie felt less like wind and more like grace. The hotel was awake but hushed. Housekeeping carts rolled silently along carpeted halls. The breakfast terrace hummed gently with the clink of ceramic and silver, and the staff moved differently now, more alert, more aware, like they'd been given new glasses to see through. Inside the East Wing, a hallway once lined with outdated oil portraits had been remade. Now it held only one frame, matte black, with a subtle gold plate beneath it. Guests passed it and paused, some without knowing exactly why, only that the woman in the portrait had a kind of presence that asked you not to hurry past. The Lucille room sat at the end of that hallway, its door newly painted a rich eggshell white. It was no larger than the other luxury suites, but everything inside had been crafted with intention. The bookshelves featured literature from black women authors. The artwork on the walls was curated from local black artists. A soft welcome letter rested on the marble side table. "For those who travel with dreams bigger than their luggage, may this space remind you that you belong." The suite wasn't open for public booking. It was reserved. Quietly and respectfully, guests of honor, young black women scholars, first-generation college travelers, those who too often wondered if spaces like this saw them. Now, they did. Shaq had approved the design personally. He walked through the room twice before signing off, adjusting only one thing: the curtains. He'd asked for them to be sheer enough to let the morning light flood in without resistance. "Make sure the windows stay uncovered," he'd told the interior designer. "If we're building a room named after my mother, it better let people see." That afternoon, Mira returned to the hotel, not with luggage this time, but with a laptop, a notepad, and a new badge clipped to her backpack. O'Neill Foundation Summer Fellow. The internship wasn't a favor. It wasn't a headline. It was a decision made in a closed-door boardroom, where her resume was reviewed on its own merit, where her academic standing, volunteer work, and poise in public were held up beside her name, not instead of it. The directors agreed unanimously. She stepped into the garden terrace, where her first meeting was scheduled. As she settled into her chair, she saw her grandmother already seated across the table, sipping tea, her tablet open. Lucille looked up and smiled, not with surprise, but with deep, familiar pride. "You're early," Lucille said, trying to set the tone. "Mira," replied, sliding into her seat. "Tone's already set," Lucille said gently. "You're just making it sing now." They talked briefly about the foundation's mentorship tracks, about a new partnership with a university, about how this internship could expand into a longer role, if Mira chose. But beneath the bullet points was something warmer, the mutual understanding of legacy being passed, not as burden but as invitation. Later that day, across town, in a modest training center, rented by the O'Neill Foundation, the first session of a new pilot program began. It was titled, Blind Spots, Facing What We Don't See. There were 15 chairs in a circle. At the front sat Lucille, not as an icon or symbol, but as a facilitator. She wore her foundation polo with the sleeves rolled, and her hair tucked in a low bun. The curriculum was her own design. Stories, scenarios, guided conversations, and time spent in the neighborhoods whose names never showed up on hotel guest lists. Jolene Carver arrived 10 minutes early. Despite the dread in her chest, she hadn't wanted to come. She'd considered quitting, again, but something about the offer felt too significant to walk away from. It hadn't been framed as punishment. It had been extended as a door. Still, walking through it was hard. She sat 2 chairs from Lucille, posture tight, arms crossed even before the session began. She didn't greet anyone. She avoided eye contact. Lucille didn't push. She waited until the room was full, until the door clicked closed, and then she spoke. "This isn't about shame," she said. "This is about seeing the people in front of you, seeing what you were taught not to notice, seeing who pays the price when you look away." Her voice was low, unhurried. "We all have blind spots, but the only way to shrink them is to admit they're there." Jolene shifted in her seat. She kept her eyes down. Lucille glanced at her but didn't single her out. Instead, she told a story, one not about her but about a young woman she once watched walk into a diner in Georgia and get ignored by 3 waitresses in a row. Lucille had been in the next booth. She'd watched it unfold, watched the woman leave, then watched the staff high-five. "I didn't say anything," Lucille admitted to the group. "Back then I didn't think I could. I still regret that." Jolene looked up, just briefly. The regret in Lucille's voice wasn't performative. It was honest, disarming. The session moved forward. Others shared. No one was forced. Jolene remained quiet, but the wall around her loosened, just slightly. She wrote something down on her notepad halfway through the discussion. No one saw, but it was the first time in days she didn't look like she was waiting to disappear. Back at the hotel, Shaq stood in the Lucille room, hands behind his back. The window was wide open. The sun beamed through, cutting across the floor like a spotlight. He picked up the welcome letter, read it again, then set it down. Then, quietly, he walked to the far wall, where a small plaque had been mounted just beneath a painting. It read, "Named in honor of Lucille O'Neill, who taught us that grace is a form of resistance." He smiled, then turned, stepping into the light. The Pacific shimmered like glass, as if holding its breath. It was early morning, not the kind of morning that arrives with fanfare, but one that unfolds in layers. The waves lapped against the shoreline behind Palm Reverie, as the hotel prepared itself for another day. Luggage carts moved silently, breakfast trays clinked behind suite doors, and a cool coastal breeze drifted through the open-air lobby, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and lemon oil diffusers. Shaquille O'Neal stepped through the entrance like a man visiting an old friend. No entourage, no announcement, just a soft "welcome back, Mr. O'Neill" from the doorman, who now recognized him by more than just reputation. Shaq nodded, smiled gently, and kept walking. His pace was unhurried, his frame still towering, but his energy quieter than it had been months ago. Back then he'd arrived as the silent owner, a force observing from above. Now he walked among his staff with familiarity. The front desk staff stood a little straighter when he passed, not from fear, from respect. Even Jolene Carver, posted at the concierge desk, greeted him with a nod that was careful but sincere. She had changed. Not completely, not perfectly, but genuinely. The defensiveness had faded, replaced with a kind of listening posture, the kind you wear when you know better now, and you're working every day to be better. She no longer pretended to know everything. She asked more questions. She paused more often. She made eye contact in ways she hadn't before. Her words had grown quieter, but her awareness louder. Shaq didn't linger. He acknowledged her with a single steady nod before moving on toward the elevator that led to the top floor, a space no guest had seen and few staff had entered. The plaque near the penthouse suite read simply, "The Legacy Suite." Inside, the space was still. Walls paneled in warm oak, floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the ocean. and a sitting area designed not for flash, but for reflection. On the coffee table sat a leather-bound journal, open to the first page in Mary's handwriting. The space is for anyone who ever had to prove they belonged in places built to keep them out. She had written it during her second month as a mentor with the O'Neill Initiative, a program now thriving across 3 cities. What had started as a reaction to one moment of exclusion had grown into an engine of mentorship, one rooted in empathy, education, and empowerment. Mara led it with precision beyond her years, reaching out to young women navigating spaces that didn't always welcome them. Not with banners or buzzwords, with real support, school prep, housing help, travel stipends, internships earned, not handed out, doors opened, not forced. Twice a week she video-conferenced into high schools and youth centers, and once a month she returned to Palm Reverie to host mentorship luncheons in the garden with young girls who didn't need a speech. They needed to see someone who looked like them, walking through a hotel lobby like she had every right to be there. Shaq lowered himself into the chair by the window, the light tracing the edge of his cheekbone. He pulled out a small voice recorder and pressed record, a habit he'd developed over the years for moments like this. "I've played in packed stadiums," he began, his voice soft, unhurried. "I've built courts, funded schools, raised towers with my name etched in stone. But none of it matters if people walk into those places and still feel like ghosts." He paused. "You can build towers, or you can build people. Only one lasts." A gust of wind pushed against the window pane, not loud, but present. Shaq leaned back, his eyes tracing the horizon. The waves rolled with a rhythm older than history. He thought of Lucille, of her quiet teachings, of how she never needed a podium to deliver impact, how she had raised him with a kind of steady grace that couldn't be taught by books. And now she was teaching again, not her son but the woman who once turned away her granddaughter, leading sessions, moderating conversations, healing without ever calling it that. Shaq smiled to himself. Down in the ballroom, a small tour was in progress, a new hire orientation. One of the guides paused at the hallway that led to the Lucille room and gestured toward the plaque. "She's not just the owner's mother," he said to the group. "She's the reason this whole place started changing." In the kitchen, the head chef, a woman named Valencia, who had joined during the transition, prepared a lunch menu inspired by the recipes Lucille used to make on road trips. Comfort food with elegance, southern roots with coastal flair, and the staff had come to know those meals as more than cuisine. They were statements of heritage, placed carefully on 5-star plates. Meanwhile, in the staff lounge, Jolene sat beside 2 new employees going over the internal hospitality handbook. Her role had shifted, not demoted, not promoted, but redirected. She now managed inclusion training for all new hires, under Lucille's guidance. She didn't claim to be an expert. She simply shared what she learned, especially what she learned the hard way. Shaq looked out at the sea again, eyes soft. He remembered the early days when this hotel had been just another luxury fortress, pristine on the surface, but hollow beneath. Now, it was something else. Still beautiful, still polished, but awake. It had windows, yes, but more importantly, it had people willing to look through them. He stood slowly, walked to the door of the suite, and lingered a moment. The sun caught the edge of the engraved brass tag. "Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you build into others." Shaq smiled. He stepped out into the hallway, heading for the elevator, one last glance over his shoulder at the room behind him. The sky outside was beginning to change again, bright blue bleeding into amber, light cutting sharp and clean across the glass like truth carving its place into the world. And quietly, without ceremony, he disappeared into the light. If this story made you pause, reflect, or see the world just a little differently, then carry that with you. Share it at your table, question what's invisible in plain sight, and challenge the spaces you walk through. Change doesn't start in headlines, it starts in lobbies, classrooms, and conversations. Keep showing up where it counts.